Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I still remember the exact moment I realized something had shifted, the way the air in the room changed, thick and heavy, like the few seconds before a storm finally breaks. My name is Layla. I'm 28 years old, married for 3 years to a man I genuinely love, Daniel. He's steady, dependable, the kind of husband who remembers your coffee order and never forgets to lock the front door. And for the longest time, I thought that was enough. I thought we were enough. Then there was Marcus. Daniel always said Marcus was the brother life forgot to give him. They grew up on the same street, shared the same dreams, wore the same worn-out basketball sneakers through college. So when Marcus came back into our lives after 2 years working overseas, Daniel welcomed him with open arms. Our home, our dinner table, our couch on late nights when the city felt too loud. I didn't think anything of it at first. Marcus was charming, yes, the kind of man who laughs easily and listens in a way that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. But I was a married woman. I knew where the lines were. I respected those lines. The night it all began, Daniel had an emergency call from work. A crisis at the site. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his jacket, and told Marcus to take care of me. Those 4 words. Take care of me. I watched Daniel's headlights disappear down the driveway from the living room window. The house suddenly felt different. Quieter. Marcus was still on the couch, glass of red wine in his hand, some movie playing low on the television. He looked over at me, just a glance, nothing more, and smiled that easy, unhurried smile of his. And something inside me, something I had buried so deep I'd convinced myself it didn't exist anymore, stirred. I should have called Daniel back. I should have made an excuse, gone upstairs, locked my bedroom door. But I didn't. Instead, I sat back down. The movie on the television was one of those slow, moody dramas, the kind where nothing explodes but everything aches. I wasn't watching it. I'm not sure Marcus was either. I settled onto the far end of the couch, tucking my feet beneath me the way I always do when I'm trying to feel small, contained. Safe inside myself. Marcus swirled his wine glass slowly, eyes half on the screen, half somewhere else entirely. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. That was the problem. It was the opposite of uncomfortable, and that frightened me more than any argument ever could. You doing okay? He asked, without looking at me. Simple question. The kind Daniel asked too. But when Marcus said it, his voice dropped just slightly, lower, more deliberate, like the words were meant to reach somewhere Daniel's never quite did. I'm fine, I said. The automatic answer. The married woman answer. He finally looked over, and the lamplight caught the angle of his jaw, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. Marcus had always been attractive. I'd acknowledged that the way you acknowledge a sunset. Objectively beautiful. Emotionally irrelevant. That's what I'd told myself for months. You sure? A faint smile. Because you've been staring at that window for 10 minutes. I laughed softly, caught. Daniel worries me when he drives tired. Marcus nodded slowly, setting his glass down on the coffee table. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and I noticed the way his shoulders filled the space he occupied. Comfortable in his own skin in a way that made the room feel smaller. He's fine, Layla. He always lands on his feet. He paused. Daniel's lucky, you know. Coming home to this. The way he said this, not you, not your home, just this, like the word held something too large to name, made my breath catch somewhere between my throat and my chest. I looked down at my wine glass. My fingers were tight around the stem. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. The movie played on, forgotten. And when Marcus leaned back against the cushions, his arm resting along the back of the couch, closer than before, neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us moved away that I don't know when the movie ended. At some point the screen had gone dark and neither of us had reached for the remote. Marcus had shifted somewhere in the last hour, or maybe I had, because the careful distance we'd maintained at the beginning of the night had quietly dissolved, the way sugar disappears in warm water. You don't see it go. You just notice, suddenly, that it's gone. He was telling me about Lisbon. 2 years abroad, contracts, lonely hotel rooms, cities that glitter but don't hold you. I'd heard the broad version from Daniel. Marcus is doing well, killing it out there, but this was different. This was the version Marcus kept for himself. The version where he admitted that the success felt hollow, that he'd spent his best nights in foreign cities wondering what he'd actually left behind. Did you leave someone behind? I asked. The wine had made me braver than I intended. He looked at me for a long moment. I thought I had moved past someone, he said carefully. Turns out distance doesn't work the way you think it will. Something tightened in my chest. I knew I should let it go, change the subject, laugh it off, ask about Lisbon's food or architecture or anything that steered us back to safer ground. Instead I heard myself ask, who was she? The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. Something more restrained, more private. He reached forward and refilled my glass without being asked, a gesture so familiar, so domestic, that it startled me. Daniel refilled my glass too. But somehow, the same action felt entirely different in Marcus's hands. Someone who deserved better than my timing, he said quietly. The words settled between us like something fragile placed on an unsteady surface. I thought about Daniel then, genuinely, painfully. His tired eyes when he came home late. The way we'd stopped reaching for each other in the small moments. How long had it been since a conversation left me feeling seen the way this one did? How long had I been quietly starving for something I couldn't name because naming it would mean admitting the marriage I'd built my entire identity around had hairline fractures running through its foundation? Marcus turned to face me fully then. Layla, he said. Just my name. Nothing else. But the way he said it. God. Like he'd been holding it in his mouth for longer than tonight that I should have answered my phone. Daniel called at 11:47. I saw his name light up the screen. My thumb hovered over it for 3 full seconds. Marcus saw it too. Neither of us said anything. I let it ring out, told myself I'd call back in a minute, that I just needed a moment, that nothing was happening that required interruption. I was lying to myself. I'd been lying to myself all evening. The lamp in the corner had dimmed somehow, or maybe my eyes had simply adjusted to the dark, the way you do when you've been somewhere long enough that it starts to feel normal. Marcus hadn't moved back. If anything, the gravitational pull between us had grown so steady, so persistent, that resisting it required conscious, exhausting effort with every passing minute. He'd been talking about regret. About the decisions that don't announce themselves as decisions, the quiet ones, the ones that look like nothing from the outside but rearrange everything on the inside. I understood every word on a level that frightened me. Some feelings don't expire, he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the casual ease he'd worn earlier in the night. This was something underneath that. Something unguarded. No matter how many cities you put between yourself and them. I set my wine glass down. My hands needed something to do that wasn't reach. Marcus, his name came out as a warning. Or maybe a question. I wasn't entirely sure which one I meant. I know, he said immediately. Quietly. Like he'd already had this conversation with himself 100 times before tonight. But he didn't move away. His eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, and I felt it like something physical. The room had contracted to just this. Just the two of us and the unbearable, exquisite tension of a moment stretched too thin to hold much longer. When he leaned forward slightly, it wasn't dramatic. There was no urgency, no rush. It was worse than that, it was gentle. The kind of movement that gives you every opportunity to stop it. His hand came to rest beside mine on the cushion. 1 centimeter. Maybe less. The whole world balanced on that 1 centimeter. My heart was doing something it had no business doing. My breath had gone completely shallow. And when his eyes finally met mine, fully, openly, with everything unmasked, I didn't look away, his hand touched mine. Not a grab. Not a reach. Just contact. Fingertips resting against the side of my hand the way a question rests at the edge of your lips before you're brave enough to ask it. Barely there. Entirely there. I didn't move. That was my first real choice of the night. Every other moment had been passive, staying on the couch, letting the distance close, not answering Daniel's call. But this was active. My hand knew it was being touched, and my hand chose stillness. The television screen had long gone black. The wine bottle was nearly empty. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly down the wet street, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling like a warning nobody heeded. The house breathed around us, settling wood, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of the city living its indifferent life beyond our walls. Our walls. Daniel's and mine. That thought cracked something open in me. I pulled my hand back, not violently, not dramatically, just a slow withdrawal, like pulling a thread that if tugged too hard, unravels everything. I stood up from the couch and walked to the window, pressing my fingertips against the cool glass, needing something real and cold and honest against my skin. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Don't be." Marcus hadn't moved. He sat exactly where he was, and somehow that patience, that absolute stillness, was more disarming than any pursuit could have been. That's when my phone lit up again. Not Daniel this time. A name I hadn't seen in 14 months. Rena. My chest seized. Rena was my closest friend, past tense, because 14 months ago we had stopped being friends over something I had buried so deep I'd nearly convinced myself it hadn't happened. Something that involved a confession she'd made to me over too much wine on a different night in a different season of my life. A confession about Marcus. About feelings that had never been spoken to him directly but had been handed to me for safekeeping like something precious and breakable. I had never told Daniel. I had never told Marcus. And I had never fully admitted to myself that the reason Rena's confession had shaken me so violently wasn't because I was shocked. It was because I recognized it. Because somewhere underneath my loyalty and my vows and my carefully constructed life, I had felt the exact same thing and had chosen, every single day, to feel nothing. I stared at Rena's name on the screen. Marcus's voice came from behind me, closer than before. I hadn't heard him stand. "Is everything all right?" I could feel him, not touching, just present, the warmth of another person standing just behind your shoulder, close enough that the air between you has already made its decision even if you haven't. Rena was calling. Daniel was somewhere on a dark road, exhausted, trusting. And Marcus was breathing quietly behind me, waiting with the patience of someone who already knew exactly how much power he held and was choosing, deliberately, not to use it, which somehow made it worse. Made it irresistible. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the window. I didn't recognize her. The call went to voicemail. My hand dropped to my side. And when I slowly turned around, Marcus was right there. I turned around and looked at him. Really looked. The way you look at something when you've stopped pretending you don't see it. Marcus stood close enough that I could see the slight unevenness of his breathing, the tension held carefully in his jaw, the way his eyes carried something that had clearly been carried for a very long time. And in that moment, that suspended, breathless, razor-thin moment, I chose Daniel. Not because the pull wasn't real. It was real. It was the most uncomfortably real thing I had felt in years, and I won't insult anyone's intelligence by pretending otherwise. But real feelings aren't always right feelings. And standing there at the window, with my reflection watching me make the most important decision of my adult life, I understood something I hadn't understood clearly before. I had been starving, yes. But I had been starving quietly, without ever once setting the table and asking my husband to sit down. Marcus. My voice was steadier than I expected. We can't. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then something in his face shifted, not collapse, not anger, but a slow, dignified release. Like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying without complaint. I know, he said. For the second time tonight. But this time it landed differently. This time it closed a door. I picked up my phone and called Daniel back. He answered on the second ring, voice tired but warm. "Hey, you okay?" I was starting to worry. And just the sound of him, ordinary, familiar, mine, broke something open in my chest that I hadn't realized had been sealed shut. "Come home," I said softly. "Please." Marcus collected his jacket from the chair without a word. He paused at the doorway, turned back once, and gave me the quietest, most painful smile I have ever received from another human being. Then he was gone. I stood alone in the living room, heart still unsteady, the wine glasses still on the table, the lamp still burning warm. But then my eyes fell to the coffee table. Beneath Marcus's empty glass, a folded piece of paper with my name on it. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The note had 7 words. "You were always the one that got away." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back exactly as it was, carried it to the kitchen, and held it over the gas flame until it caught and curled into nothing. I watched the last corner blacken and dissolve between my fingers. Some things aren't meant to be kept. Some truths are only meant to pass through you, to illuminate something, then release. Daniel came home 40 minutes later, smelling of cold night air and the faint exhaust of the highway. He looked exhausted in that deep, structural way that goes beyond sleep. I met him at the door, something I hadn't done in longer than I could honestly remember, and when he looked at me with quiet surprise, I simply stepped forward and put my arms around him. He held me without asking why. That was the thing about Daniel that I had stopped seeing somewhere in the comfortable routine of our years together. He never needed an explanation to show up. He just did. We talked that night, really talked, the way we hadn't in months. About distance. About silence. About the invisible walls that grow between two people not through cruelty but through neglect, through assuming love is self-sustaining without tending. I didn't tell him about Marcus. I told him about me. About feeling unseen, unheard, quietly hollow in spaces that should have felt full. He listened. He didn't defend himself or deflect. He just listened, and then he reached across and took my hand with the same hands I had watched him use to build our life, and said simply, "Tell me what you need. I'm here." Rena and I reconciled 3 months later, slowly, imperfectly, the way real friendships rebuild themselves after fracture. We never spoke Marcus's name directly. We didn't need to. Some conversations live entirely in what goes unsaid. Marcus moved back overseas the following month. Daniel mentioned it casually over breakfast one morning, the way you mention weather. I nodded, refilled my coffee, and felt, quietly and completely, the gentle closing of a door that should never have drifted open, grateful, above everything else, that I had caught it before it did. Some nights still, I think about choices. About how the most significant ones rarely arrive loudly. They arrive softly, in dimly lit rooms, wearing the face of something almost beautiful. And the strength isn't in never feeling the pull. It's in choosing, clearly, consciously, with your whole heart, to stay.